Hi, I'm Chris, aka the Philosopher's Games, and today we look into the first main teaser, as Amazon calls it, for the upcoming The Lord of the Rings of Power show, which comes in September. I again tried to break it down and go through it almost frame by frame, give you the lore background, explain what we might see and what this could mean for the show, and of course compare it to what is written in the books. And I also freestyle this here quite a bit, because this allows me to produce these videos quite a bit faster. So before we start, as always, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it. Shoutouts to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks like Kimberly 80, Ted Naismith, Jenny Dolphin or Sara Morello and all the others. And spoiler warning, I guess. But let us start. The new main teaser starts where the old teaser basically ended. And this is in Numenor with this exact scene here. We see a ship down here, which is a Numenorean ship. We will see this later in the trailer. And I don't want to repeat myself, so I skip over most of these scenes we already know from previous teasers already. Maybe check the last breakdown if you want to have more information on them. But just to get everything on the same level, what is Numenor is a very important question, because Numenor will appear a lot in this teaser here, which is pretty interesting. First of all, Numenor is an island. It was once called Elena, which translates to Star Wars. Numenor basically means Westland. It's a place very far in the west. It's an island between the west continent Aman and the continent of Middle-earth. So in between, in the ocean, there's a big island. And there, a group of men lives that are called the Dunedain, the Men of the West. Quite fitting, I have to admit. If you know Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings, he is one of the Dunedain, and he is a descendant of the people of Numenor. So these people here are his ancestors, a specific line of the people of Numenor related to the line of kings. It's complicated, so I won't go into that much detail when it comes to the line of kings, but Numenor was a gift after the War of Wrath, where the forces of good fought against the forces of evil at the very end of the First Age, and the forces of evil won. A group of men called the Edain got a reward for this, and one part of the reward was that they got this island here to dwell on in peace. They also got a longer lifespan, or to be precise, the lifespan was restored to what it was before the fall of man, at least in some versions Tolkien wrote. It's a very complicated topic, just as a little side note. So that is Numenor, and it's a very powerful and important realm in the Second Age, and due to the Numenoreans, or the Dunedain, the Edain once being in the service of the Elves and being visited by the Elves, they got a lot of knowledge and possibilities, you could say. They even got very powerful gifts like the Palantiri, we know several actually from The Lord of the Rings, and also the White Tree and other details. So there are a lot of possibilities and knowledge and wisdom that the Dunedain could achieve, and as a result, they became very advanced in comparison to your standard men from Middle-earth. This place here that we see here is Numenor. Maybe this is Romena, or maybe this is Armenilos, because there's a river leading there. Romena would be more like a huge bay area, and the western part of this bay area we have the harbor city Romena. The other screenshot we know from the previous teaser, which we'll here see again from a different angle, is most likely Romena. This here looks a bit different, so it's maybe a different place, but that is hard to say. So let's continue with the next scene here. In this scene we see Galadriel in an extreme close-up. I would call it an Italian shot. Shoutouts to Sergio Leone. If we just press on play here, she looks directly into the camera, and that is very reminiscent of Cate Blanchett as Galadriel in Peter Jackson's films. We have a very similar scene. There though we have like stars in her eyes, and I just recently read on Reddit that they built a specific or unusual rig for that with a lot of lights to get this effect, and this is missing here, but as stated in magazines and interviews, they go for a different aesthetic and try to be a bit different. So I can totally understand why they're not trying to repeat exactly the same trick that Peter Jackson was doing when he filmed his Lord of the Rings films. But not much to see else here. We have, of course, some dialogue, which we might talk in a moment. And here it becomes complicated again. In this scene, we see the Two Trees of Valinor, and they are, pun intended, deeply rooted into Tolkien's mythology and writings and lore, and connected to so many things, it becomes really, really difficult to explain what the big deal with this scene is. I try to, and I will probably fail, but just that you know there are some more dedicated videos where I have more time to explain this, like who is Círdan and the history of the Elves. And there's one video called Why Do the Elves Like Trees, where I also explain this about the White Tree of Gondor. And back in August, I think, 2021 in August, Amazon released this screenshot, just zoomed out a bit, as their first ever screenshot of the Rings of Power show. And I made like a video, a breakdown about this. I link all of this in the description. Maybe check one of those videos out, or especially the last one I just mentioned. That might give you a better overview than what I can do here in this trailer breakdown. But this is kind of a big deal because it's a beautiful shot and it has very deep lore implications. And I assume it will be in a prologue in the very first episodes of the Rings of Power, because this is not the second age, it's the first age, and it is the years of the trees, to be precise, and the years of the trees are called this because of these two trees. So where do we start? Maybe where is this? I just mentioned Numenor, and that it's an island between Middle-earth, where the Lord of the Rings plays, and the West Continent. And this here is the West Continent. And Valinor is a place or region on the West Continent that is west. This direction here is west. West of a massive mountain range called the Pelori. And in this mountain range we have a little gap at some point, which we see here. See the mountains left and right. And this is the Kalakiria. The Kalakiria translates to cleft of light, and it's a very fitting name. Here in the background we see Valmar, the city of the spirit beings of this world, the good ones at least. And here in the front we see Tirion, which is an elven city. The clans, the Vanyar and the Noldor, created it. There's a third clan, the Teleri, and that is east from here. This is west, then it's east, northeast, something like this. So where we are sitting, basically. And this is where this is. Now explaining what we see here, that becomes really, really complicated. Maybe we first start with when this is. So we already mentioned it is the first age, or the years of the trees. And if you, for example, know the Lord of the Rings, there it plays in the third age. Frodo leaves the Shire 3018 years into the third age. Then if you have seen the first Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings film, you see that Isildur cuts off the ring of Sauron's finger, or all the fingers to be precise. In the book it's just one finger, and takes the one ring for him. This happens at the very, very end of the second age. And then at the end of the first age we had the War of Wrath. The second age is 3,441 years long, and it begins after this War of Wrath. If we combine those numbers, we are already at 6,459 years. And that is a really, really long time already. If we now go 590 years back from the War of Wrath, then we come roundabout to the destruction of these two trees. And so we are now at 7,000 years, a bit more I would say. And we know that this is the time amount from when Frodo leaves the Shire, minus 7,000 and more years. This is roundabout when the time frame we are seeing here. So that is quite impressive. in of itself already, but there is just so much more to it. This year was even before sun and moon were created in Tolkien's mythology. So even that sounds strange, but this was the light source of the world before the years of the sun. Though there are some inconsistencies in Tolkien's writings that indicate that sun and moon existed even during this time. However, that's a very complicated topic. Just for the hardcore nerds, I want to mention it here. However, it becomes now very complicated because we need to outline a few things. First of all, these people here living. Here the beings are, as said, spirit beings. I would compare them to angels because in Tolkien's world there's only one almighty creator god called Eru Ilúvatar. And not all, but at least these spirit beings here serve him and originally were sent to Middle-earth as his servants. And these spirit beings, called Ainur in the world, divide into two groups or more groups, but let's keep it with the two main groups, I guess. And the other ones are not named anyway, and weird special cases. But the main groups are the Valar, the powers of the world, which form something like a god pantheon. So we have one Valar for smithing, one for nature, and so on. And they are extremely powerful spirit beings, though they have a physical appearance and are bound to the world here. But just to give you an idea, like they usually compare them to the angels of highest rank, or call them high angels, because they serve God. Then there are Maiar, who serve the Valar, and of course God as well, but they are the servants of the Valar, and together they govern the world, if you make, and form the world even to some degree. And they are called Maiar, and examples for that are Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, and the two blue wizards. Though in these cases, when we know like Gandalf, Saruman, they were in the disguise of old men, and they had to diminish themselves. Tolkien writes they have to forego might and clothe themselves in flesh. And that describes it relatively well, in my opinion. So they're not at their full strength when we see Gandalf, Saruman, and so on in Middle-earth. So when we see Gandalf the White, he is probably a bit less diminished, I guess. However, these are also very important inhabitants of this of Aman. And then here we have the two Elven clans that created the city, the Noldor and the Vanyar. And now we maybe have to somewhat explain that the Elves did not originally come from here, but they awoke or came to be in Middle-earth, and then they traveled here. Because, of course, we have here the forces of good, then there are also, on the other side, the forces of evil. So also, Sauron is a Maiar, and the former master of Sauron, Morgoth, was a Valar once, and he was kicked out of the group of the Valar and did terrible things, and they are the forces of evil. Same with the Balrogs, they are also a Maiar, and serve Morgoth. And this Morgoth got influence on the Elves on Middle-earth, and then the Valar, to protect them, brought the Elves over to this place here. And this place, also called the Undying Lands, has the probability of not really changing. And this harmonies very well with the nature of immortal beings like the Elves. And that is why at some point the Elves have to come here. At the end of Return of the King, we see the Elves sailing west, like we have this ship sailing into the sunset. And this is where the Elves go then. And why they have to go here, because their being requires to be here at some point, because it resonates better with their immortal being, because this land does not change, while Middle-earth is a land of change. And that is a very important detail in the lore. And at the time of these two trees, these blessed two trees, like they also kind of blessed the lands and even empowered the Elves when they were close to these trees and saw the light of them. It's a very, very important thing for the Elves and deeply rooted in their culture and mythology, and also a reason why the Elves like trees. So that was the short version of this. And I already mentioned that these trees at some point got destroyed, or it hinted at that, and that has to do with the master of Sauron, Morgoth, and the mother of Shelob. They together got here and destroyed these 2 trees. And before, though, that happened, an elf here called Feanor managed, he was the biggest, the most important, the most powerful craftsman of the elves in history, like ever. And he managed to create 3 beautiful and powerful gems and he trapped some of the light of these 2 trees into these gems. And these gems were called the Silmarilli, or Silmarils in the anglicized plural. And these trees and these gems are very important for the Silmarillion. And the name suggests already that it's kind of important, I guess, because Silmarillion means something like about the Silmarils. And that is the reason why it's so complex to explain, because a huge part of this book has to do with that. So, just as a brief overview now, these gems were created, these trees were destroyed, this place was darkened, and then out of the last fruit of Laurelin, the left tree, the golden tree, the sun was created. And out of the last flower of the right tree here, Tilperion, the moon was created. And this is how in the mythology sun and moon came to be. And this is now the very brief overview of this in just about 12 minutes or so. And I know it's long. I hope people who know this already skipped further. And we can now continue with other stuff. Some inconsistencies we see. This tower here in theory should have like a light and glow. And maybe in one very obscure source we can read that these mountains here left and right have like shining diamonds in them. That is also missing, but overall I'm quite happy with what I'm seeing here. It's pretty awesome. I think most people who know the Silmarillion really are absolutely amazed by this beautiful scenery here. Really cool to see the 2 trees. And as I said, this is first age. The Rings of Power plays in the second age. And as a result, this must be like a flashback or prologue, something about the past. Maybe we also see the destruction of the 2 trees. Very curious about this. Galadriel also in the trailer says there was a time when the world was so young that there had not yet been a sunrise, but even then there was light. So this basically explains what I just said. The sun hasn't risen yet because at this time here the sun wasn't there yet, just these 2 trees. But still there was light, as we can see here. Quite interesting. If we now move further into the trailer, and I hope we get to this, we see like a group of elves traveling through this region here. I can't tell you where this is exactly. And then we see them here on top of a mountain in the snow. Elves, of course, should not leave footprints, which I don't think they do, which is kind of awesome, I think. And we see this big, I would assume, eagle in the background. And if you see it, it appears behind the mountain, so it's in the background. And if these elves are in the foreground, this eagle must be massive. So I assume it's one of the great eagles that we see here. Pretty nice to see already. And we already mentioned the 2 trees a moment ago, so I can maybe put this in. This company, if they look at the clothes and the amount of people we see here, just like, I don't know, it's 9, I think, or 10. It's one of them is most likely then Galadriel, and we saw them already in a previous teaser. Maybe I find the exact passage here. This one here. We see Galadriel holding a dagger in her hand, and this is very reminiscent of the Two Trees of Valinor. There's also a poster with her holding this dagger, and there it becomes more apparent even that it represents these 2 trees here. So a pretty cool detail. Let's move on further. My assumption where this here might be, by the way, like if we look at the shadows, this here, like let's pretend it's noon, then this here, then the sun is here, this is south, this is north. So, I don't know, it could be, in my opinion, anywhere, I guess. if the shadows are correct here, and they go into the direction of south. If this is the case, though, they would be maybe somewhere on the White Mountains, but could be anywhere. I would assume, though, they are more in the north, lore-wise, because that is probably more interesting for searching, because the first big fortress of the first Dark Lord was very far in the north, Utumno. And yeah, Helen and I in the stream discussed a bit if they might searching this or remains of this or outposts of Utumno somewhere deep in some caverns of mountains in the north. Hard to tell, but we could be completely wrong here. Very curious to find out where that is. If we move further, we see another place, and kind of interesting. I assume this is Lindon. The reason why I do this, I mentioned the War of Wrath a moment ago, I think, when I explained the two trees at the end of the First Age, and at this before the War of Wrath, Middle Earth was a bit bigger. There was like the west coast was further west, and there was a land between called Beleriand, and that was sunk into the ocean. And at the Blue Mountains, where Lindon is, like they got a bit destroyed, you could say, or pushed thunder, and there a bay was formed, and Mislon, for example, was placed at this bay, and maybe some other places, and this whole area west of the Blue Mountains became Lindon. And this all, like if you look at the mountains, it looks a bit like they were split apart and so on. So that's kind of fitting for that. So I would assume, yeah, that might be really Lindon or a part of Lindon somewhere. We also see these white trees with these yellow leaves, which is very reminiscent of some other scenes. And we know from the screenshots and their subtitles in some magazines, every time we see like these trees and the golden leaves, we read something, oh, that is in Lindon, something, and as a result, I would assume it's the same. If we compare this to some Peter Jackson screenshots of Peter Jackson's films of Rivendell, we can definitely see in the structure some similarities to Rivendell, and we, of course, Elrond, as the herald of High King Gil-galad, lived in Lindon for a time, so maybe it looks a bit similar. Makes kind of sense in this context, I would say. But let us move on a bit further. Now we see a pretty cool scene, and this must be Moria. We see finally some dwarves, and the voice in the off basically here, at this point here says, when we see the Lindon here, the elves have forests to protect. Dwarves, their mines. So this must be Moria in my opinion. Or Khazad-dûm as the dwarves call it. Moria is like the elvish name. Also a difficult topic. And we have another scene later of Moria, which we will discuss a little bit more. But I have to admit, like if we look into the back, like here in the background, we see like it's massive. There's a lot of stuff going on. Some speculate if we see like the bridge of Khazad-dûm here and there. I would say that's not the case. We discuss this later though. Then in the next scene, we see men and in their fields of grain, as the voice says, men their fields of grain. And very short scene, but it kind of makes sense that it must be men just from the size, and they don't have like plants in their hair, so it's not Harfoots. My theory is that if we jump back to this second teaser trailer we have seen in the past, we see this tower here, and then there's somewhere in it, I hope I find it, a scene. Here it is. No, I missed it. This one. This scene here, if there was also, the screenshot was already published in the Empire magazine. If you zoom in that one, you can see some details here a bit better. Maybe I can do this in post-production. And you see houses and smoke here. So maybe we also see something that could be fields here. This is like a small village or so here, and it is exactly that scene that we have seen just from a different angle. Would be pretty cool in my opinion, but I could be completely wrong here. Just a theory of mine. Then yeah, we see this scene. This one is really quite interesting. There's a detail probably completely missed, but we see first of all these two people here with antlers or some whatever on their shoulders in the field, probably hunting or so. In the first teaser, we also saw them already, and here you see them a bit better in their antlers. They're probably hunters or something. Find this still strange, but I read the theory, I think on Twitter or Reddit, that maybe they are just pushing whatever they are hunting into a certain direction. Then in the field, like here we have some hunters that are actually, and they're pushing them into the direction of these hunters so they can hunt their game easier. Something like this. And then here in the front, we see a Harfoot, a proto-hobbit. Like there are 3 hobbit breeds, the Harfoots, the Fellowhides, and the Sturs. For example, Gollum was one of the Stur hobbits, but they are all hobbits, proto-hobbits if you want to call. In the Second Age, you could argue the term hobbit did not exist yet, which would make sense. I will call them proto-hobbits or hobbits here, because like the species didn't really change. It's just like a very, like one of the early clans, tribes of the hobbits, if that makes sense. And here we see this, I assume, a woman with a whistle making a sound, and I assume because hobbits can't be seen by anyone in the Second Age because they only appear in records in the Third Age in the year 1050, so not even close to the Second Age, and as a result they can't have big interaction with like everyone who writes down records, like the elves, some of like the Numenoreans, and so on. Like that would be pretty unusual and strange, so they have to hide. And even from the Lord of the Rings and old mythology, we have some interesting details that might even give us a hint at what the developers of the show reference here with this whistle. Let me just read this quote from the Lord of the Rings. It is said by Theoden in the chapter The Road to Isengard or Isengard. In my version, it's page 557. And there, Theoden says about the hobbits, all that is said among us is that far away, over many hills and rivers, live the halfling folk that dwell in holes in sand dunes. But there are no legends of their deeds, for it is said that they do little and avoid the sight of men, being able to vanish in a twinkling, and they can change their voices to resemble the piping of birds. So maybe the piping of birds is what is referenced here, and it also describes that they avoid to be seen by men, and as a result, this might reference exactly this here. Pretty hard to tell. Also wondering if this is like an object or a flower or so. Still, they simply don't want to be seen, it seems, and she warns the other hobbits. And now we have an interesting cut to the other hobbits that are just partying like crazy in the forest, hobbit style, I guess. And that is kind of their warning for them, and now they have to basically flee. And she now says, she continues the sentence. We already said elves have their forests to protect, dwarves their mines, men their fields of grain, but we Harfoots have each other. We are safe. So she basically, I assume, could maybe speak to Nori, one of the names we already know about one of the hobbits. We also saw in the last teaser here at the very end, this is Nori. She sees a meteor and sees the impact of it. And yeah, maybe from the articles, it seems she is like a bit wild and wants to explore the world, and I don't know. And maybe somebody warns or says, we are in danger or something, and she says, no, we have each other, we are safe, don't worry. Something like that. But let's move on. The hobbits or the Harfoots, the proto-hobbits, always have like some plans and things in their hair. That is not really referenced in the books, in my opinion, but maybe there is a reference. I don't know. I'm not aware of. I know. Here we see now Nori again seeing the meteor, and it impacts. She holds up her hand to cover her face, And then, yeah, based on the works of Tolkien, we will notice that there will be some changes. Like I said, in the books, the hobbits don't play any role in the Second Age. They only come into appearance in the Third Age, so thousands of years later than from the events we are seeing here. That makes very little sense book lore-wise, but the showrunners said they would maybe create a story for them that's isolated from the others. Very curious what they do, but of course we know from the prologue of The Lord of the Rings that the hobbits were around since the First Age, which is also called Elder Days. So they were definitely there in the Second Age. They were just hiding so well that nobody knew they existed, I guess, or very few knew about them. We discussed this already in the last breakdown, where we discussed this book section here quite a bit. Check this out there, explain it in more detail, what's going on with hobbits and hiding, and the connection to the Norsemen. Let's just move on. This scene here we already knew from the first teaser. Here we have finally a new scene where we see Galadriel in this uniform. And I mentioned a moment ago that we have this group of people here on the mountains, and look at what they're wearing, their clothes and armor and equipment. And we also have this scene from the first teaser, looks very reminiscent of that. So I would assume that is the exact shot, just we have more footage of while they're exploring somewhere on top of a mountain where it's very cold, maybe in the north. Maybe these are the White Mountains. Very difficult to tell. Impossible. And here we have our first interesting, easy to miss detail. I would argue a lot of people will not have noticed. First of all, it's awesome that we see some ice on her boots, or whatever you call these armored boots. And we see her sword, and now I have to really try to find the exact frame a bit. It's difficult to see, but something is wrong with her sword. If I now move very slowly, yeah, we see it's cut. Like this, it's broken. The sword is broken off. I don't know what the meaning of this is, because we know from The Lord of the Rings there's one person known for a broken sword, which is Aragorn, and Narsil, which was broken at the end of the Second Age in the War of the Last Alliance. They also seem to go for a theme for Galadriel with a broken sword that she carries around. We know she is, from the articles published so far, that she is hunting down the enemy and trying to find the murderers or people responsible for the death of her brother or brothers. She had 3 brothers. We know how they died. Two died in a battle called Dagor Bragolach. We might discuss this later. And one was killed by Sauron, actually, in Tol Sirion in Beleriand. But yeah, I don't know what's going on. Maybe this is a sword of her brother or so, or I don't know. Maybe somehow it could be related to that. I don't know. Aragorn's sword has to do with his ancestors and his past, so maybe they tried to emulate this here with Galadriel and her broken sword, but it's not in the books any shape or form. There's another scene later in the trailer where we also see the broken sword if you freeze frame, and it becomes more clear than here at a certain point. Also, in this scene, you see she doesn't put the sword that deep into the ground. And here, it's relatively short if you compare this to this sword. Also, we should keep this sword design here in mind. We also see her dagger, that we have seen her climbing up the mountain. Quite interesting. And she holds a scroll, maybe a map or old text or so. Hard to tell. But it seems like, and that is an idea I really like, that she is like an adventurer traveling through Middle-earth, trying to find clues. Where's the enemy? Where do I find hints of people responsible for the death of my brothers or whatever? That is really interesting, because it could lead to a cool sightseeing tour of Middle-earth, going to very unusual places that people might be interested in seeing. And this looks like, I really like the screenshot. I think it's beautifully, like the colors and the scenery, pretty beautiful. I really like that. So maybe let's move on. Let's see what's next. Oh yeah, here we see Elrond, and yeah, one detail. like we see this elf also, I assume it's an elf, has short hair. We don't know who this is. Maybe it's Celeborn, but if it's Celeborn, he should have silver hair, by the way, so it doesn't fit. Elrond also, I'm not sure if he's ever described with long hair, but there are mentions of Noldor, and I would count Elrond towards the Noldor to some degree, though that is a very complicated topic. And Teleri have long hair. And a lot of other characters, like Boromir and so on, a lot of other characters in Lord of the Rings are described with long hair. So we know this long hairstyle from Peter Jackson's films, and that doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, there are actual hints in the books that was quite common. So now they're changing this a bit. I don't care too much, to be honest, but just to explain, there is a foundation for long hair, for having long hair for elves, especially in Tolkien's writings, just in case people wonder. And he basically says, you have fought long enough, Galadriel. Put up your sword. And Galadriel answers, the enemy is still out there. The question is now is where. And then he says, it's over. And Elrond basically means with it's over that the times of the first Dark Lord and so on, that's probably over. We don't have to fear another enemy and so on. And that, I personally, is a dialogue I really dislike a bit. Also, just as a side note, there's maybe something written on his back in Kirs, but I can't read it. I tried to read it, but I could not make sense out of it. However, I don't like this dialogue because in the books, we know that, like, Elrond, as mentioned, is a herald. Like, herald is a medieval diplomat, if you want, like a messenger diplomat that goes somewhere and has like message, for example, of the king. And Gil-galad is the High King of the Noldor elves in Middle-earth. And Elrond works for him as a diplomat, if you want to say. And he later also becomes vice regent for him. So he has a very high position over time. This might be very early in the Second Age, so maybe he still has to learn a lot of things. That's, I assume, what they're going for with Elrond. But on paper, we know that very early in the Second Age, around the year 800, 850, Gil-galad wrote a letter to the Numenoreans and saying that in the far east there's a shadow rising, and that they need to ally to basically help each other out against this danger. And at this time, Elrond was already in his service, so I would assume that if Gil-galad knows about the shadow in the far east and fears it, Elrond does as well, because that is a concern of his king, and as a result, as a herald, it is also has to be the concern of Elrond. In this context, I find this not fully fitting if they change this. So this might be one of the character changes, and this is like a character development for Elrond, that he at the beginning also feels safe and says, no, we are safe, evil is defeated after the War of Wrath, no matter. And now you also maybe notice why I explained the War of Wrath and had this long section earlier in the video, because we will mention this multiple times. And yeah, now where should the new evil come from, which is Sauron, of course. In the books, though, I feel like Elrond also knew. He also has the gift, like Galadriel, of foresight, so he can know what happens in the future as well, and have maybe, I don't know if he has visions or like just an understanding of what might happen. Was just very good at counting one and one together and predict what might happen. Like, foresight can mean all kinds of things, but he also is known for his foresight in the lore. Same as another elf, Círdan, the shipwright, who is also in the service of Gil-galad. He is the oldest, probably one of the wisest elves in Middle-earth. He's older than Galadriel even, and he also, like, would probably be on Gil-galad's side with this and has the foresight to foresee this, not only Galadriel. Like I said, I'm not really the hugest fan of this little dialogue snippet here because, I don't know, it seems not fully fit to Elrond, because even though he's still very young, Elrond is, in comparison to Galadriel, potentially much, much, much younger, though he is half-elven, which changes things a bit. And that makes it, I don't know, not fully fitting in my opinion, especially if you consider Gil-galad writes this letter to Numenor somewhere between 800 and 900 Second Age, and Sauron takes Mordor as his realm around the, I think, Second Age 1000. So that was even before Mordor was even his official realm, right? It was very early on in the history of Sauron and the Second Age. And then when Sauron comes to the Elves and tries to, I don't know, infiltrate them, I would maybe say, around Second Age 1200, he is rejected by Lindon and by Gil-galad and by Elrond. And Sauron even comments on Gil-galad and Elrond in the Silmarillion, saying, "For a mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all law is Master Elrond, and yet they will not aid me in my labors. Can it be that they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own?" So it seems Sauron in his disguise attests the knowledge and wisdom of Elrond already very early in the Second Age. And of course you can make the argument that Sauron had to stay in his disguise and not reveal himself, so he has to talk positively about his enemies. Still, I think his statement only makes sense if this part of it is actually true, that Lindon is a blissful realm and that Elrond is a very wise master of the law and Gil-galad is a very mighty king. Otherwise, the point he tries to make makes no sense. In my opinion, it's not fully fitting. We jump back to another scene here with Galadriel and her company in the snow. I was invited by the German Tolkien Society. We also discussed this teaser here a bit, and somebody suggested that this might be dead bodies, but I don't think so. It's just stones in my opinion, but I could be wrong. It's not that clear to see, but here in this shot, yeah, it really looks like stones. Not much to say here. Let's move on further. So Stormis, and yeah, here I think she says the enemy is still out there. The question is now where, and this indicates that she's searching. Where is he? I have to find the enemy and find clues, and that might be related to her expedition into the cold. This scene also, if you look at her hair, you see there are maybe these laurels we see in some of the other screenshots in her hair, and we know that she meets Elrond, and the background also looks color-wise, even though it's blurry due to the focus here, that we have the screenshot where we see these white trees in the background, and she meets Elrond then. She's talking here to Elrond. We might see Elrond here in the reflection of her eye. And I could be wrong though. And in this scene, we know from the... maybe it can show the scene to you in post-production. And in this scene, we see Elrond, Galadriel, and it's we have the subtitle of the screenshot meeting in Lindon or something. And as a result, I would assume she is in Lindon visiting Elrond here, and this dialogue here that we have seen here might, as a result, also play in Lindon. Maybe here we also see a white tree in the background or so. Hard to tell. Just to give you an idea where this might be. Then we see more of her expedition into this cold area. Now she's inside the mountain, I would assume, in like an old cavern. It's hard to tell if it's man-made or if it's a natural cavern. Like there was one scene in the first teaser. Let me see if I can find it really quick. This one here. If you look at the ground here, this here looks like the floor is made out of tiles. Maybe it's just still early in production or so, and they just make it digitally better, looking different later. I have no idea, but maybe this is man-made, and she has really discovered like an old outpost of the enemy or so. Hard to tell here in this scene though. I can't really say this. However, here on the left we see a huge hand, which is potentially that we have seen before the ice troll we will also later see here in this. It's definitely related in my opinion. Some say the hand might look different, but I would say, yeah, it could really be the ice troll hand. Makes most sense. This here, I'm not sure if this is a head or a rock. Looks a bit strange, to be honest. Also, something is here, but it's really hard to see. I don't know. This scene here, I can't make much sense out. I would love to tell you, yeah, that is this place. Sadly, I could not find out yet where this is. Maybe it's Lindon. There is a screenshot, but we don't see these bridges, so I would exclude Lindon. Maybe it's Numenor, but this looks like a lake or a big river. Not sure. Maybe it is Armenilos, the capital of Numenor, because we see something in the stone, and we know that in the mountains, the Numenoreans put the graves of their kings, and then this would be like an outlier south of Meneltarma, as it's described in the Unfinished Tales, I think. But I'm not sure if this is Numenorean design. Usually we see some ships that have this very distinct Numenorean design, which we will see later. It's not the case either, but Eregion would not make sense. Like, there is the capital in Eregion. Eregion is one of the Elven realms. We already mentioned Lindon. There's Eregion, Lothlorien, and the Woodland realm where Thranduil, or maybe his father, depending on the version, lives. These are the three big Elven realms of Middle-earth we know of. There's also Iselond in the far south, where Gondor will later be founded, where the region of Gondor later will be. But yeah, that's roundabout it. And in the region we have the capital Ost-Inithil, and it's close to a river, but I would imagine that more flat. I'm not sure if this is Ost-Inithil, though there are some mountains, and the river is somewhat meander heavy. That's, I think, what the curves in the river are called. And so it could fit. It could be Ost-Inithil, to be honest. So, like, I don't know. Somebody suggested this might be Anúminas, but Anúminas is not created yet. It's the capital of Arnor at some point, and Arnor is not founded. It will be founded very late in the Second Age, and probably after the events we have, much later after the events we have seen so far. So it would surprise me, but I guess not impossible. Like, it's at a lake, but yeah, maybe this is not a lake, just a river that just goes around here. Pretty hard to tell. Can't really tell you if it's Numenorean design or Elven design. So no clue, but write it in the comments. I'm curious what your speculation is here. So let us see further. Now we see Elrond, it's over, he says, and she now says, "You have not seen what I have seen." Then he says, "I have seen my share." "You have not seen what I have seen." And in a way, she is right. Galadriel is significantly older than Elrond, and as a result has seen more of those terrible First Age battles. Though Elrond has seen the War of Wrath, it seems, because in the Council of Elrond he references the destruction of Thangorodrim, which is part of Angband, the fortress of Morgoth. So he probably has seen one of the biggest and the most devastating wars of the First Age. There might be others that are on the same level, but that's a different topic. It's at least one of the biggest battles of the First Age. Yeah, maybe let's move further. As said, I'm not the hugest fan of this dialogue. Don't want to repeat myself here. But of course, Galadriel has seen more. She has also seen the light of the two trees we discussed for such a long time at the beginning. She was born here on the west continent, Aman, same as Celebrimbor. But for example, her husband Celeborn has not seen the light of the trees. Elrond has not seen the light of the trees. Gil-galad has not seen the light of the trees. And Círdan also not, even though he was around when they existed, but he was never in Aman. He was of a group of elves that stayed in Middle-earth, the Sindar. And now we have a vision, and this now brings us again back to the First Age. I'm not sure if I mentioned Galadriel's brothers. I think I did. And two of them died in a war called the Battle of Sudden Flame, Dagor Bragolach. So this battle had to do with fire, and we see some sparks flying around, and the red impression gives like like fire, something is burning in the background, we see particles in the air, and she's full of ash or dirt or whatever, and looks somewhat almost traumatized here in this scene. It was a devastating loss for the elves, and as said, the Middle-earth was bigger once, and there was the west coast was further west. This land was sunk into the ocean and got completely destroyed after or in the War of Wrath, and then the new west coast became Lindon and the Blue Mountains. Before that, there was just much more land in front of that. And in this land called Beleriand, this war happened, and the elves basically besieged Morgoth, so it definitely shows how powerful the elves were. They besieged Morgoth and held him for centuries in his fortress Angband, his second fortress. First one was Utumno, also called Udun. And then Morgoth unleashed fire and his forces, and also his dragon Glaurung, and it became very devastating for the elves. It was terrible for them. They had heavy losses, and a lot of elves died. For example, the two brothers of Galadriel. And maybe this is like a flashback to this, what she has seen in the past. And if we move on further, we see this scene. And this is difficult to also put into like a perspective, if that makes sense. Because if we play this, you see something moving up here, and you have these waveform on top. So this seems to be underwater, which is further underlined by the fact that we see buildings here left and right. So it must be underwater, especially then these corpses here would simply swim or float in the water or underwater. This person here has a spear maybe pierced through him, or maybe he holds it with his other hand. I would assume it looks devastating enough to consider that he's pierced by the spear. Hard to tell. And I can't really give you a really good answer where this here might be. So, at the very end of the Numenorean arc, Numenor will be sunk into the ocean. And that might be what we are seeing here. Because we know it's underwater, then maybe this here in the background is the Temple of Morgoth, which will be on Numenor, and maybe it sinks things last into the ocean. I don't think this here might be the... Let me just see if I find it really quick. In the first teaser trailer, we see this light, this tower here with a fire. I don't think it's that. But I could be, as said, completely wrong. That is one possibility. It's Numenor, and when it's sunk into the ocean. Like, you can compare Numenor a bit to Atlantis. The Numenoreans were extremely advanced, but went into the wrong direction, and then terrible things happened. Don't want to spoil too much of the Numenorean arc, because I assume it will be a big part of the Rings of Power. Of course, Numenor is not around during Lord of the Rings, obviously, so I think it's not a huge spoiler to say that it vanishes somehow at some point and it gets sunk into the ocean. Quite interesting. What other event could it be? I also mentioned that Beleriand, the old west coast of Middle-earth, got sunk into the ocean. So this could also be like some part in Beleriand, if it's a flashback. The problem with this being Numenor is that would be in the future. So this is a vision of the future of Galadriel, and maybe she knows it's Numenor, and she also knows the enemy is powerful. And only when all three people of Middle-earth unite, they have maybe a chance against the new evil arising and coming up in the form of Sauron. And if she knows that Numenor gets destroyed, which is really powerful and advanced, then she knows, okay, we might be in a lot of trouble. So maybe that is what she fears. On the other side, if we just stay in the realm of flashbacks, it could of course also be, and she's saying, I have seen something, though I have seen could also be a vision, I guess. It could also be the end of Beleriand. Another suggestion Helen, the clueless fangirl, did in my live stream was that this might be the so-called first kinslaying. I mentioned that Feanor needed ships to get back to Middle-earth, and he killed the Teleri. We have this beautiful artwork of Ted Naismith that illustrates this, so it's less red, more bluish, and maybe this is the elves thrown into corpse fighting and falling into the water and so on. However, it makes no sense that we see in this scenario buildings underwater. So I would assume that can't be the kinslaying, but it's a good idea in my opinion. Though the amount of dead people here in the water seems to be absolutely massive. So I don't think, if we would not see these huge houses here left and right, I could imagine maybe some other things. It's like a river and the killed elf fell into the water. So, but yeah, it really looks like an absolute catastrophe, and only these two events come to mind that would fit. But let's move on further before we're already very long here into the trailer discussion, and we still have quite a bit to go. Yeah, here there's not much to say here because we discussed this in detail already in previous trailers. We see this ship here. This ship that we see is maybe the ship we see here. Maybe-ish. Hard to tell. I would say this here is definitely Rowmena. Like we discussed Rowmena here at the beginning of the trailer and the beginning of the first teaser trailer. We see the sun symbol here and we see this exact place from the other side. Some assume this here is a statue of Eärendil, which would make sense. It is the father of the first king of Numenor and the father of Elrond. The brother of Elros became the first king of Numenor. And he decided to be, as a half-elven, to be counted towards men. And Elrond decided to be counted towards elves. And so their paths were divided in a way, but still, their father remains Eärendil, who is also half-elven and decided to be an elf. So there's that. And maybe it's a statue of him, quite possible. Could also be a statue of Elros, I guess, but I don't know. We will find out who this might be. This here would be Tol Uinen, an island in the Bay of Rowmena. And on Tol Uinen we know that there's a lighthouse called Calmindon, which would be this one here. I think that fits perfectly. In addition, if you look at the daytime and shadows, this mountain would be then in the west from this perspective, and east of the mountain on the island, we know that there's Rowmena. So this makes it, in my opinion, most likely. Also see now on this other shot, the perspective from up here, and also see a look at the ship design that we know. Like the sun symbol definitely hints at this being Numenor. It's a common theme here. And look at the ship design. It seems very, very reminiscent of what we have seen here, like this one here. Pretty cool. Here's the shot from the other side. If you cut them back to back, it fits perfectly. But let's move on. Definitely, though, Numenor. Here we see now Lindon. This screenshot we discussed last time quite a bit. Here we see these birch trees, I assume. They have like the white bark, and we have these golden leaves. One could argue it's Malorn trees, that we also know, for example, from Lothlorien. The problem with Malorn is Tolkien mentions in a note in the Unfinished Tales that Malorn trees do not grow in Lindon. So this man, Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor Elves, got a gift from Numenor these seedlings for these trees, not for these, but for Malorn trees, which had silver bark and also these golden leaves. And he could not grow them in Lindon. And then Galadriel took them and she managed to grow them in Lothlorien. So I would argue that does not fit. Though maybe they don't have rights to the Unfinished Tales and have to ignore this detail. We don't know. Possibility. Just saying from the book's perspective, Malorn trees should not grow in Lindon. And I'm pretty sure this is Lindon because we see these trees in the background. Also, we see these guards here, which are also seen in every other scene we know is in Lindon. This soup bowl here, there's another shot in the first teaser trailer where it's like a ceremony. It was a second teaser. Here, this one, you see the birch trees, I guess, and you see the guards here in the background, the golden guards. And here's like a ceremony. Here's the bowl, just the other side. I could imagine that if we go back to the beginning of this trailer here, that it's maybe somewhere here on the other side or so, maybe over here. Hard to tell. Really hard to tell where this is exactly. Oh, I'm just skipping too far ahead. And here gil-galad says his interesting quote. He says, "Darkness will march over the face of the earth. It will be the end, not just of our people, but all peoples." So he basically says that there's a shadow potentially in the Far East, and it will bring us a lot of trouble. We have to prepare in some shape or form. Very curious how this is. Some suggest that maybe he asks Galadriel to return to Valinor and call for help of the Valar. Like Eärendil, we mentioned the statue here a moment ago. He did basically this. Yes, and he was successful in it. Maybe he sends Galadriel. And in some versions, Galadriel is banned from returning to Aman in the Second Age and Third Age. In some versions, she's not and just decides to stay in Middle-earth on her own free will. It's a complicated topic. Though, in my opinion, makes not too much sense. It's not mentioned in the book that she returns at this time. Because Galadriel's ambition was to have, like, she left the West Continent, Aman, and returned to Middle-earth because, as she calls it, does not want to be under the tutelage of the Valar. She wants to have like a realm of her own and rule over it and have like the possibilities that Middle-earth offers. While in Aman everything stays the same, and she's from the royal line of the Elves, but she's like the youngest child, so her chances of becoming a queen or ruling or so are basically zero. And as a result, she goes and founds her own realm somewhere else, and that might be Eregion. And later she managed to she rules over Lothlorien in the Third Age. But that is not at this time here. At the beginning, she is in Eregion. And so it seems unusual for her this early in the Second Age to return to Valinor, though it might be what they are going for, because there's some ship action we have seen. But yeah, this makes sense though. Gil-galad, as a small detail, would have silver hair, but we only know this since last September. There's a note in The Nature of Middle-earth published where this hint was basically explained further. So, yeah. Before that, it was assumed, but we never knew. Here in this shot, we see the Bay of Lindon. If you look at the map, that's quite fitting. We see some place here and here. We don't see bridges, so I assume this other shot where I said I have no idea where this here is. We don't see the bridges here, so I assume it's not that. But I don't know. Hard to tell. This is also the root of the tree we have seen in the shot before here. I assume maybe this one here. And Elrond's now standing over there. Hard to tell. He looks kind of surprised because that's maybe what Galadriel already told him, and he's surprised that Gil-galad shares this belief. That would be my interpretation of this. But let's move on. Next scene is very interesting because here we see a new person that might be important. First of all, IGN published some pictures of orcs, and people were very happy to see this because they all use prosthetics, or however it's pronounced. So they look really good. The orcs looked on these shots really spot on, like Peter Jackson did it, not the CGI orcs from The Hobbit. And some of them we also recognize, like this dude here, and I think this dude we also have seen some others. There might be also some orc female here. And this guy here in front looks a bit fitting, but also a bit different. And this seems to be Adar. Amazon also published like a poster, and there we see him for the first time. There was also a character poster where it was speculated that it's him, but we don't know for sure. On the other post, we also see a sword, and that is very reminiscent to, I said, maybe keep this sword design in mind. It's somewhat reminiscent to these swords, which might be a sword design of the Noldor elves. So he might be somehow related to the Noldor elves. There's later a screenshot that also confirms this Noldor sword design a bit further, and maybe he's related to them. Hard to tell. And on this poster, we also see on his shoulders like some stars. And if we look at Galadriel here in some of the shots, we also see these stars here and there. So, yeah, I don't know. There's definitely some connection going on here. In the leaks, he's called Adar, which means father. And he seems to be a corrupted elf, and he's leading like an orc army, I would say, and they even have like a ram here. And where are they going? Like, my theory is, it's not mine actually, I read it somewhere and I really liked the idea. So shout outs to the person who came up with it. We know from the second teaser this bridge here, and I read the theory that maybe they're coming up this path here and going to this tower. And Arondir, one of the newly created characters, he's not in the books or so, but he's a character created for the show. We know he's on this watchtower, watching over the land here, and maybe he's in the tower and in these ruins, and I don't know, by accident or so, and they just want to conquer those because it's a good watchtower spot and they need that. I don't know exactly why. We also see two persons here on the bridge. And I like the theory that they are going here, and that is how he might get caught, because if we go to the first teaser trailer, let me see if I find the scene. So hard to find. We see him here jumping through the air, and he has a chain bound to his leg. We see this chain again later in this teaser here. Here we see him jumping, and he also has a chain. So it might be, he gets potentially captured by the orcs. Let me just see. I just want to have the other scene again. As I said, it's a bit hard to find here. It's such a short little scene here. If you look down here for a moment, you see the faces are somewhat grayish, so I'm not sure. It could be maybe orcs here in the background as well. Hard to tell though. Could be completely wrong. So that is my impression. He was like captured by the orcs, put to labor or so, and he has to fight for his life, or I don't know. And then at some point I hope he escapes. So yeah, that is my suggestion, what is happening there. Shout out to the person who came up with this idea. Like it a lot. Next scene, we discussed last teaser breakdown quite a long time, so I want to skip through it fast. As said, beautiful shot. Makes complete sense if you have all the elven details and mythology in mind. There's like this beautiful artwork of Ted Naismith that portrays what Tolkien described, that the white swan ships of the Teleri elves are basically pulled by swans. Like there's like a line between them and the ships, and they pull the ships. So you see like these elven ships and white birds. It's a connection some people definitely make in their mind. So this makes sense. So this ship is clearly not pulled by these white birds here. But yeah, it makes sense. And here in this scene, it expands a bit what we have seen in the last teaser, where these elves look somewhere and look in amazement. And now in this other scene from this teaser trailer, we see them looking into a very, very bright light, maybe the sun. Some assume they look at the Two Trees of Valinor, but you see, if I play this here in the background, that we see waves, like a wave motion in the background, like water. Very hard to see here. And so they're still on this ship, and maybe this is a part of the sail or so. And you won't see the light of the two trees, especially not in the second age. Like in the second age, the two trees don't exist anymore. There we have already sun and moon. So that makes no sense. And we also know Galadriel's ship traveling are very limited. She only travels to Middle-earth once somehow, either over in some versions over Helcaraxe, and there's one version where she travels to, in the Unfinished Tales, where she travels back to Middle-earth from Aman to Middle-earth by ship. And that is in the First Age. And then she travels back to Aman at the very end of the Third Age. We have seen the last scene from The Lord of the Rings already. That's basically it for Galadriel sailing somewhere. I assume she's sailing to Numenor, because there are some leaks, and we know from the later screenshots of the trailers and other hints that she is seen in Numenor with characters that live in Numenor, like Elendil. As a result, she could be sailing there, and they have to go west, and it looks, maybe at some point you go against the sun, I guess. But I don't know. Another theory I had is that they're looking at the first sunrise, but why would they be on a ship at that time? It seems still strange to me. Also, somehow she has to shipwreck, like she has to fall into the water and be on a raft with another character invented for the show called Halbrand, I think is his name. We see him later in the trailer, but I don't know. This here is Miriel, or Tarmiriel, at this point, or at some point, the ruling queen of Numenor. And of course, you can imagine she plays an important role. We have this picture already in the last trailer, and we have some additional pictures in magazines, which I might be able to show here in post-production. And now the shot is a bit longer than in the second teaser, where we only had this shot. You also see the sun symbol on the shield. By the way, if we move back to the ship that we see here, you also see a sun symbol here on the sail, which I forgot to mention. So it's 1000% a Numenorean thing. And the last, so this is definitely Numenor. If we look, we see like a fire there, and it looks a bit like streets. It's an important detail, I think. And here's another person now in this shot that was missing last time. She looks up. And in the last teaser cut, it was implied that she looks maybe at the meteor, which is possible. Now here, maybe she looks at these flowers falling down, which we have seen implied here already. Some suggest that this might be flowers from the white tree of Numenor. The tree is called Nimlos. Though this tree stands in the garden of the palace, so it seems strange that it's here, because I think these are just some streets in Numenor, maybe it doesn't really look like the palace. I don't know, I could be completely wrong though. Also, we see like, I assume a sun symbol here and so on, so pretty cool to see details like this. And we know from The Lord of the Rings already that the tree withering or losing flowers is like, can be seen as a bad omen. And of course we know there will be conflict and problems in the Numenorean arc. So this hinting at something is definitely a possibility, I would argue. A detail, and the comments of last breakdown, somebody I know, made a comment. I just want to briefly mention this here. It seems like, and it's very apparent, that Amazon for the show is going for what is called, I think, non-traditional casting or colorblind casting. I guess. I don't know. We will see when the show comes out. And that means basically that you cast actors and, for example, their skin color is not matching with the description of the source material, which is the case here. Like Tarmiriel is actually related to this man here. Of course, all it needs is one mother to change your skin tone quite a bit, but you would expect Tarmiriel also to be white in the books, but I don't care about this detail, just want to mention that is also a potential difference to the books, how things are described there. If I just comment very pedantically on everything else and ignore this. Also, Farazon should not have a beard. Numenoreans, he's of the royal line as well. This character is called Farazon and is from the royal line of Numenoreans, the line of kings. And this line, as Tolkien describes in, for example, The Nature of Middle-earth, had no beards. And they seem to ignore this. This also is then the case for, by the way, Aragorn, for Elendil and Isildur and so on. All of them should have no beards. But yeah, that's just a small detail. Just want to complain. Also, yeah, I don't know, age-wise it seems a bit strange. I am not 100% sure, to be honest, when Farazon was born, but they should also have somewhat a similar age, I think. But I could be wrong. Whatever. Next scene, we see two Harfoots, two Proto-hobbits, and she has like tears in her eyes, not sure what's going on. The only detail I can really comment on is we see, if you look at the movement of these sparks in the air, you see it's not sparks, but it's fireflies. There's a little black thing here, and there's the glowing part of the firefly. And you also see here and there the wings of the fireflies. So it's not sparks in the air, but fireflies. What's going on with those exactly? I don't know. I originally thought this is a new character we have not seen before, at least his face, though it's not in focus, so it's blurry. It's a stranger. And I originally thought this here is an actual spark and he's maybe controlling it. But if you look a bit closer, you see here, it's probably due to YouTube compression, impossible to see. But there's also some like wings or so around. So this is also a firefly, I would assume. What's going on exactly? I don't know exactly. But it was a weird sentence. Here in the background, we also see two hobbits, I assume, with a lantern. And I assume it's Nori and her Harfoot friend. But I don't know exactly what this is. We will talk about the stranger later in the trailer, I think. Yeah, we will. This scene now, I mentioned already, it's Moria. I really like that we see like grass and so on growing inside of Moria. We have waterfalls. A lot of stuff is going on in the background. Some suggest that this might be the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, but we know from descriptions of articles and so on that Elrond is maybe doing a diplomatic mission to Moria for reasons, and if he does so, he would enter Moria from the west gate. However, the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, where Gandalf falls into the abyss, is at the east gate, so it's very unlikely that this is the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm, another detail, should also be a bit more slim, not more narrow is I think the word, because it's designed as a defense mechanism, so that only one person at a time can cross it, so that the dwarves, if somebody would attack them, could easily defend the bridge and just shoot everybody off the bridge that comes over. And they are forced by this bridge, whoever wants to get to the other side, just to go one by one, and it makes it easier to defend. That's the design idea of this bridge. It's a defense mechanism, and yeah, that doesn't look like it. It's, of course, relatively narrow, but not that narrow. What else do we see? Very unusual is the masks these dwarves are wearing, their armor. They seem to have beard armor. And what you have to know is that the beard was very, very important for the dwarves. We can read in The War of the Jewels, where like some notes of Tolkien were published, in a text called Concerning the Dwarfs of Naugrim and the Edain. We can read the following. Indeed, this strangeness they have that no man nor elf has ever seen a beardless dwarf, unless he were shaven in mockery, and would then be more like to die of shame than of many other hurts that to us would seem more deadly. So, losing the beard and would be like the dwarf would shame the dwarf so much that he would potentially die from that, even though he would survive hurts that to elves and men would be absolutely deadly. So dwarves are a bit unusual in that regard. That makes them kind of cool. What I like about the dwarves is that they are so unusual and so fantasy and so very mythologic in a way. I like that a lot. Also, in this same text, there's a mention that dwarven men and dwarven females have beards alike, and that they have beards since they are born. So it's quite interesting details Tolkien had there. Some would argue that in the Nature of Middle-earth, there's an indication that Tolkien might have later changed his mind. I would not agree on this, but I can definitely see the point. Though keep in mind, you can interpret this passage also a bit differently, in my opinion at least. But that's a topic for another video. Still, yeah, pretty awesome. Somebody mentioned that it's somewhat Akkadian, the style of that, but I'm not an expert on military equipment of different times of our time, but I don't know. Hard to tell, but I like it so far. I find it pretty cool. We have this mask. Also, that's another mention of masks that dwarves had in the Silmarillion. I mentioned the battle of the very devastating battle of Sudden Flame, the Dargor Bragolach, and there's a mention of another battle that is called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and it was their custom, moreover, to wear great masks in battle, hideous to look upon. And these masks and so on protected them also against the fire of dragons and so on. So it seems like this is what this look is referencing, and I find it pretty cool. There were also some other screenshots that came out later. I think one came yesterday or today from the standpoint of this recording, and there's some stuff written in the background on the wall. If you're interested, check my Twitter, for example. I had a translation put up there, what this might mean and so on. Pretty cool stuff. There also see these guys a bit closer, and you see another picture of Durin the Fourth, which might also appear sooner or later in the trailer here. Also, like I said, all the stuff happening in the background, and it will be so awesome to see Moria at its peak. Like, Moria is not just some Dwarven kingdom, it is the Dwarven kingdom, and it's absolutely fantastic to see it at its peak and not as abandoned and this dark place we know from the Lord of the Rings. Like, it's, in my opinion, pretty awesome. In this shot, you also, you could complain about the height difference. The height difference between Elrond should be really tall. He also has a scepter from this weird scepter from this one screenshot, from this one character poster. Kind of interesting here. And he should be much taller than the dwarves. Here it looks like they are not that far apart, but it might be just the perspective, I guess. Like in this shot, this dwarf here behind looks much smaller. And in this shot, he looks suddenly taller, and the first one looks smaller. I don't know. It might be a perspective thing. However, Moria, pretty cool. Looking forward to this quite a bit. Then we see another dwarf, and this is also a first time. This, I assume, is Durin the Third. What is strange, if you compare this to the books, is that he talks to most likely Durin the Fourth, which we know is also in the series. So, two Durins at the same time makes, in my opinion, very little sense from book perspective, because Durin the Deathless, one of the 7 fathers of the dwarves, of Durin the First, he and the other fathers are reincarnated from time to time. Then, after centuries, a dwarf is born that is very similar in looks and I guess behavior and so on to Durin, that he becomes the next Durin in the line. And if that is the case, it is strange that you have like Durin the Third and the Fourth at the same time. That seems very strange. We don't know when Durin the Fourth was born. We only know that during the Second Age and during the whole arc surrounding the creation of the Rings of Power, Durin the Third was the dwarf in power. When Durin the Fourth was born, we don't know. He's not mentioned in this area at all. So I would have preferred if this would be like not a Durin and he would be Durin the Third, or he would be Durin the Third and Durin the Fourth had like a different name. I don't know. It seems strange to me, I have to admit. Also, a lot of Dwarven names are basically from Old Norse texts, usually the Edders. I guess always the Edders. Kind of interesting. But to me it seems insanely strange to see like If he's the reincarnation of him, how can they both be father and son? That seems very strange to me. Maybe they ignore this detail though, because I think it's not mentioned in The Lord of the Rings. Only in the Silmarillion we have some indication for that. Then this scene we had already in the first teaser. There's like a rock smashing contest between Elrond and Durin the Fourth. This is Durin the Fourth. I can't comment really on that, but I can see that the dwarves have something competitive about them, so I guess it kind of makes sense, though it's not directly mentioned in the books. I don't know. And we have this horn here, which looks really cool, I have to admit. So I don't know, somewhere there must be Elrond in the background. We don't see him, and the dwarves look pretty cool, I have to admit. Like, I like what I'm seeing here. Then we have this elf. I assume he is an elf. Not 100% sure though. And he climbs with Galadriel up the icy wall. We discussed this, it's the expedition. And then in the next shot, he is on top of the mountain and discuss the scroll or text or the mission with Galadriel. I assume it's him. If he's Celeborn, I don't know. He should be around there somewhere. In the other trailer, like this one here, we see this person. I always thought maybe it's him, but hair doesn't really fully fit, I guess. Maybe this is Celeborn. I don't know. It's so hard to tell what's going on there exactly. Celeborn, her husband, is missing completely so far from Rings of Power. So we are making decent progress. I hope we can get through the rest relatively fast. Here we have the mentioned Halbrand. It's a new character. I assume he's a Norseman because he has an old English name, I assume. Yeah, not much to say here. If you look in the background, that is maybe interesting. He's in Numenor and he looks really... He has some bruises, is wounded, I guess. Looks washed up, I think. And the others look like are nobles, like in fine robes. And we see this clothing pattern with very, very colorful robes here and there. Kind of interesting. And there's another screenshot where we see him then also have like different clothes and having like a good time, drinking something, holding up a cup or so. I assume he somehow is on this raft, lands in Numenor, is washed up there or so, and then they help him out. And here they just ask, hey, who are you? Maybe there's a shot we have seen of Tarmiriel and her, I assume it's her throne room or the room where she gives like audiences or so. And maybe it is in this one and he looks at her or so. I don't know. And because the Numenoreans wonder, where are the people coming? And I assume Galadriel comes with him to Numenor in a weird way. How this exactly happens, I don't know. It seems very, very strange. Galadriel was most likely not in Numenor, and she was especially not in Numenor when Tarmiriel was queen, because there was a time when elves stopped visiting Numenor. There was a time where elves visited Numenor from time to time, usually, interestingly, from Aman. I think there's no direct reference of elves from Middle-earth visiting Numenor, but it is, of course, possible. One reference there is Círdan, the shipwright, or his men sail over the men or to Numenor when they got this island as a gift. But else, there's no mention. But in theory, it's possible. And at some point, the elves did not visit Numenor anymore. And Galadriel just going there on a raft seems extremely off. I'm not a fan of that. But keep the clothes here in mind. Then we see Arondir for the first time, I think, here in the trailer with his wood armor, which is still unusual. The background, maybe it's a butcher or so, because we have some meat hanging here. Or, I don't know, he's cooking for the village or whatever. I don't know. He has like a tavern, or maybe it's just something to drink, because it's like a cup he's holding in his hand. See here. And he offers something to Arondir. I don't know. Kind of interesting. And he basically in the text says, and it's easily to miss, the past is with us all. And then in the next section, by the way, in this section with Durin, I skipped the dialogue. He says, I'm sorry, but the time has come. What this means, I don't know. We know there is some unfortunate accident happening and like mines collapsing or so. Maybe it has to do with that. I don't know. And then in this scene we see Galadriel, and I think this is Halbrand again. I could be wrong. Hard to see. And we see Galadriel on a white horse, and she's riding with Numenorean cavalry. It's very unusual for Numenoreans to have cavalry, because Tolkien explicitly states they have none, because they really like horses and riding, so that definitely is fitting. But they use their horses only for riding along and basically for fun things, not for war. Maybe in war they have a messenger on a horse riding in light armor or so. That is a possibility. But what definitely is very unusual is that Galadriel is riding with Numenoreans. We know from the screenshot where we see Tarmiriel and riding with an army like this, and we see these white scales and so on. So that definitely seems to be Numenorean. Very unusual. If they are here on Numenor or on Middle-earth, also hard to tell. It doesn't look like Numenor, to be honest, but I could be completely wrong. Maybe they returned for whatever reason to Middle-earth, because we know at some point Numenoreans started to settle in Middle-earth. That was long in the past before Tarmiriel, but there seems to be a massive time compression for this for the Rings of Power series. So I don't know. It seems very strange, though this is clearly contradicting what is written in the books, in my opinion. Moving on further, like slow motion shot, we have her crying again. We see a lot of tears here and there. I don't know why, still to proto-hobbits. And then here the mentioned, Galadriel. Also, this is Galadriel, and she's almost struck by lightning. Here you see it. You see the remaining part of the lightning, and she falls into the water, I guess. She bound herself to this mast of a raft. And in another screenshot, we see two persons on the raft, and there were some making-of screenshots where we see Galadriel and Halbrand on this. So we know both of them are on the raft for whatever reason, and it seems like they go to Numenor for whatever reason. I don't know exactly how they went into the situation. For me, it makes very little sense, but visually looks, of course, good, though the lightning should struck at the highest point and so on. Galadriel maybe should not survive this either, but I don't know. It is a bit strange. Let's not discuss physics here. Here we see a Numenorean ship. We have already seen it, I assume, from the back, because when this is the front, and this is two ships. We have this one and this one here in the background. And looks pretty cool. And here we see also, finally, Isildur. This was revealed to be Isildur, and he is a mariner, the son of Elendil. Elendil, we know, and Isildur, of course, from the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, and Aragorn is a descendant of him. And it seems like the others have the very, very similar clothes or uniforms, so they are serving in the Numenorean navy, I guess, and sailing around. There's a second ship here in the background, so you see it clearly. And pretty cool. The ship is looking pretty cool. I'm not sure what the deal is exactly with this scene. Let's move on, because I really need to end the video soon. Here in this scene, we see Galadriel and Elendil. We have another shot where we see both of them, and we know the title. This is Elendil and Galadriel riding somewhere. And if you look at the horse, you see it's not perfectly white. So the color, and it's a very, I think, noble horse breed or whatever. I have no idea about horse breeding, so don't ask me. Very, very noble, but in this scene with the cavalry shot, you see it's very white. So that's definitely a different horse than that one that we just see here in this scene. Where they are here exactly, I don't know. This first reminded me of like an artwork of Ted Naismith of Vanyamar, I think. But I guess it's on Numenor, because we see Elendil and Galadriel in this also specific dress. Maybe she also strands in Numenor and then gets this dress, and because she's really an elven noble of the royal line of the Noldor elves, and even of the royal line of the Teleri elves. So that is, like, she's very important elf. And yeah, it seems like she befriends Elendil there, because there's another shot where we see Elendil and Galadriel in like some kind of archive or library, and with a lot of scrolls in the background. And on the shelves and some other objects, we see a little insignia, a little, whatever you want to call it, a device. And this symbol is the symbol of Eärendil. We mentioned him earlier already in the video, like in the first teaser at the beginning. Yeah, this here might be Eärendil, and yeah, we see his insignia in this archive. So very interesting. Maybe she's doing some research in Numenor, because the Numenoreans were also pretty good with doing with having records and gathering knowledge. So maybe that helps her in some way finding out stuff. I could imagine at least this, but yeah, not much to say. If we look at the shadows and so on, I have the theory that this might be Andúnir, because Elendil and especially his father, not sure if he will be in the show, Amandil is his father, his name, is the Lord of Andúnir. And Andúnir, there is like, I don't know, a parallel line to the line of kings. Like originally, the Lords of Andúnir also from the line of kings, but there was one daughter that was the firstborn, and at this time, daughters could not become ruling queens of Numenor. That was changed later, but at this time it was not possible. And so her descendants became the Lords of Andúnir and had a very high position, of course, in Numenor, but the line of kings continued somewhere else. Though when it comes to being related to the first king of Numenor, also Elendil is related, of course, to the line of kings. And let's imagine the line of kings would end, then he could make a claim for kingship as well, I guess. But yeah, that is the story of this. And we know he's the Lord of Andúnir, so it would make sense, and just me speculating here. Let's move on before I lose track of what I want to say. Here we see a close-up of him. This is Elendil, the guy who got slain by Sauron later in the War of the Last Alliance, and his sword Narsil breaks, and this is his son Isildur. He also has another son, Anarion, and in this series, like an invented daughter, originally called Karine, but this seems to be a placeholder name. Her actual name, according to like Entertainment Weekly article, is Eärien, which means daughter or maiden of the sea in Quenya, and Elendil and Isildur are all Quenya names, so that is fitting and fits. Like, it makes more sense than I could make out of Karine in Quenya. Like, that didn't felt like a Quenya name, but I guess it definitely was possible that it's a Quenya name, though, I don't know, I couldn't translate it. Let's put it that way. And he says, Elendil says, the past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it. So he maybe means that, there are big changes in Numenor, and they have to move forward and don't look too much at the past and so on. He maybe tells his son what he thinks. Interestingly that I mentioned Eärien, because we see her here. This is Eärien. I also didn't notice first, but I read this somewhere. It makes completely sense. She's like the daughter of Elendil, which is not mentioned in the books, and she's an architect or something. Interesting. And the people, this guy here is Farazon, I mentioned him before, very important in the later arc of Numenor. And the people, he gives a speech, and people are cheering, except for some people. And that is kind of interesting. Maybe I'm interpreting too much into this, but she looks not that happy. Maybe that's deliberate. And she has this particular clothes. So we know that in Numenor there was an inner political conflict between two groups, the Kingsmen, which were loyal to the king, and the faithful. And maybe these are the faithful, potentially. Maybe not. Hard to tell. Maybe it's the other way around, but it wouldn't make less sense, because Farazon is more on the side of the Kingsmen, and Elendil and his family is part of the faithful. So hard to tell what's going on, but that's my theory. Maybe it has to do with this, because we also see this dress and these colors on her standing here. Quite interesting. And she's also not cheering, so these are the only two we see that are not that happy with what she's saying. And all these two, this dude here maybe also, I'm not sure. But yeah, Farazon, of course, very important character. As said, she should not have a beard though. Here we see it better than on the other shot. And what is very important, of course, is that, yeah, I don't want to spoil too much, but will be very interesting to see what is happening. He is described as, yeah, Farazon the Golden later, so he doesn't look too golden yet. Kind of interesting. Here we see Halbrand again with picking a spear. We see like a Numenorean rider, or one person of cavalry background. Not sure what happens exactly here. And here Durin the Fourth, and he holds up a bit of metal, of ore, which I assume is mithril, and that is found in Moria, and might be a reason why the elves of Eregion settled there, and they had developed a very good relationship with Moria. And he says here, this could be the beginning of a new era. So I assume they are playing with this, that maybe Moria finds mithril, and then this changes a lot in the region surrounding Moria and makes Moria insanely even more powerful than it was before, because this is a silver metal, and gold is is considered as a material with a bad or an evil tendency, if that makes sense. Tolkien describes this in Morgoth's ring, and elves often like silver, I guess, a bit more, though they also use gold at times. Still, yeah, this has powerful properties. It's like the mail of Frodo that we know from the Lord of the Rings is made out of this. I assume this is mithril. It could be wrong though, don't get me, but that would be my guess here. And it makes sense in the context of what he's saying. So that changes a lot. I'm not sure when mithril was found in Moria though. Could have been, Moria was already around in the First Age, so it could have been found in the First Age as well. But I guess for the show, it could make sense to use it as a device that it's found in the Second Age. But yeah, I don't know for sure if that is working out with the books. I could imagine though, because we know the elves settled there in the Second Age in the form of Eregion and Ost-Inithil having even a straight to Moria, and they're working together. And we can even read that the craft of Eregion, was a realm of the Noldor, and the Noldor clan is known for gathering knowledge and crafting things. So they and the dwarves have something in common in that regard. And we can read that the craft of Eregion would not have gotten so high without the help of the dwarves, and Moria would have not gotten so beautiful without the influence of Eregion. So they definitely helped each other out. Pretty cool quote. Maybe I can put it in post-production. Then, this scene here, oh boy. That is also difficult to explain, but we already explained Feanor, who created the 3 Silmarilli, these powerful stones that captured the light of the 2 trees. And I assume this scene here is the so-called Oath of Feanor. After the Silmarilli were stolen, he and his 7 sons swore, and I guess his complete house, swore an oath to retrieve the Silmarilli from Morgoth by any means necessary, and whoever comes in their way is destroyed. We also see a very similar sword design. I mentioned that before with Adar and Galadriel, and these are, of course, Noldor elves. And yeah, they pulled up their swords and swore an oath. That's definitely a possibility what we see there. We only see 4 sons, but there should be 7 plus Feanor. And we see it's dark outside, because this oath is after the 2 trees are destroyed and sun and moon are not created yet. So we only have the stars as light source, and it's dark outside. And the structure also looks a bit elven, so that's perfectly fitting in my opinion. I think very likely this is the Oath of Feanor. Everything else would surprise me, to be honest. And it's pretty cool to see. There's a beautiful artwork of Jenny Dolphin that illustrates this. Though my imagination would be more reddish color-wise, because that's also a description we read in the Silmarillion. As a result, Jenny Dolphin's artwork is also more reddish than this here, but I don't care. It's pretty cool to see this. Might be a flashback. And this, yeah, we discussed this already. Arondir doing his moves, dodging like a walk, which is pretty nice to see. We see some people in the background. There's one, like two here. Up there's somebody, but not much else to say here, sadly. There's also one maybe hiding, or he's dead, I'm not sure. Pretty hard to tell. Seems to be like a pit or so, or maybe they're trying to escape, or I don't know what's going on. But it seems, I hope that Arondir can escape and maybe help the other people. I'm not sure if this dude there is still alive. He also has like a weapon or an axe or something in his hand. Quite interesting. Let's move on. Here we mentioned Ice Troll and Galadriel doing a roll. Very reminiscent of Dark Souls, dodging the attack with a roll, then hitting him. Not much else to say. Here we see again the ground. Maybe I was wrong, it's not tiles, because here it looks more natural, like the frozen ice maybe made cracks into the ground. That's why it looks like tiles, but I don't know, could be wrong. And yeah, she finds this ice troll and has to fight him. Here we see a person looking out, and Galadriel slays him. Hit him on the head, probably usually a bad idea. Also, if we stop here at a certain frame, we can see that Galadriel's sword is indeed broken. So yeah, there's that. Next scene, the Meteor Man, as he's called, or Meteorite Man. And yeah, we see the fire, the stuff is is hovering, it's not falling down, it's not like an impact that pushes every stone away. It's literally, there's fire, which he now absorbs, and then, there were also these stones flying around. We're almost done with the trailer, which is good. The problem is, this kind of confirms my idea. Like, we know Meteor Man comes in this meteorite to Middle-earth, and this sounds very supernatural. So, we are at power level wise, you would say these days, we are at the Ainur level. Like, this might be a Maiar or something. And there are not that many Maiar that could this be. I've discussed the wizards that they have to forego might and disguise themselves as old men. Doesn't look like this is one of the wizards, one of the Istari then. Then another detail, like some speculated Gandalf, but Gandalf finds out about the hobbits much, much later in history, like in the Third Age, and he comes to Middle-earth in the Third Age, so that doesn't work. Another possibility, some said maybe a Balrog or so, in a different form. I don't think so, because Balrogs, after the War of Rust, were in hiding, and they were not risking getting found by just flying as a meteor past everyone. Especially the meteor is a symbol of that something outside of the world comes into the world, and something very powerful. That is very strange, and I don't like the idea. It's not mentioned in Tolkien's writings at all. There's one meteorite mentioned that is found by an elf called Eol, and he extracts metal out of the meteorite and forms two legendary swords called Anglachel and Anguriel. And these swords, and Anglachel is later reforged into another sword called Gurthang, the Iron of Death, and that becomes a sword of Turamba, and a very tragic figure of men in the First Age. And yeah, I don't know. There are the implications that the sword of Turin, the sword later broke. Might be, we see a broken sword here too, that this might be the sword of Turin, but in my opinion, that the implications and the power of this sword is too great, and I would not put it, don't want to see it in a show like this. That would make no sense at all. And I also, like I said, who could this be? This last scene here, looks like a fiery eye. If you turn this around by, yeah, I don't know, 90 degrees or something, or 45 degrees, then you might see this as a fiery eye. So it might be Sauron who lost his memories and appears in a disguise in the world. You could make this fit, I guess. And this is my guess that this might be Sauron in disguise. It would fit the Second Age in a way, though it would also not fit perfectly. Very strange. However, Sauron disguise is basically as an ambassador of the West Continent, so what basically Gandalf, Saruman, Ragas and so on are. So I assume this is where they are going. They may be saying, hey, this guy is like Gandalf or so, and then it turns later out that it's Sauron. That would be my big guess, but I don't know. Like, this is not mentioned in the books at all, but this particular scene here is very revealing. Like, this symbolism here seems to be very unusual. And then last we see Sardok, one of the Proto-hobbits, one of the Harfoots, and 3 other Hobbit women walking through the landscape, and then the trailer ends. And because I'm talking for 2 hours now, I'm very sorry for taking so long to break this down, but it's just so much to unpack, it becomes difficult. I still hope you enjoyed watching this breakdown here, which isn't really a breakdown when it's 2 hours. Still, I hope you liked it and it helped you out in some way. Thank you people for watching. See you next time. Now, my post breakdown section, just a few hints. I personally was very positive when it comes seeing the trailer. I kind of liked it, though I'm very worried about the stuff that's not in the books and all the changes that contradict the books, especially Meteorite Men. I'm not a fan of this idea so far, if I understood it correctly. And as said, it's not mentioned. That worries me greatly. I hope, though, I might be wrong or I can just live with it. But it seems really they will do some changes to what is written in the books. And that was to be expected in an adaptation. Peter Jackson also did a lot of changes. And yeah, I don't know. Show comes out 2nd of September. If you like this video, press the like button. Leave a comment, maybe subscribe if you aren't yet, and if you do so, consider pressing the annoying bell, which sometimes doesn't work. And maybe follow me on Twitter for updates. I will make another stream when a new trailer drops. I also have to still do the next part of Who is Elrond, which was a bit on delay, because I recorded this here 10 times or so, and took a lot of time as a result, but I have no idea how to do it differently, to be honest. And yeah, I really tried to do this here now in under 2 hours. I had some recordings where I was far over 2 hours, so I don't know, this was a bit faster. I still think about doing this in German for the German channel. I might do this, so maybe there will pop a German version of this up, but there I won't care about length too much. We'll just try to explain this as good I can, also freestyle, because it's just too long to make a scripted video out of this. So yeah, look out for all of this. Gaming content is, as I said, a bit pushed back. I don't know, Twitch streams, I try to make them whenever I find time for that. And there will be more content lore-wise or Tolkien related on this channel. If you like this, check it out. There are playlists in the description for my best videos. Check the description. I'll link some videos that might explain the 2 trees further. And I would say that's all that is left to say. So thank you people for your support, for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.